Of all the novels with a strong sense of the city, The L-Shaped Room is among the most successful. First published 40 years ago, it's still in print, it's been successfully turned into a film, and it's been translated into many languages. In a way, it set the scene for the London of the 60s. It's a novel about a young, unmarried, pregnant woman who's forced out of the middle-class family home and comes to live in an L-shaped bed-sitting room here in Fulham in West London. Now a very fashionable area, but then distinctly down at heel.
My room was 5 flights up in one of those gone-to-seed houses in Fulham. All dark brown wallpaper inside and peeling paint outside. On every second landing was a chipped sink with one tap and an old ink-written notice which said, "Don't leave tap dripping." There were a couple of prostitutes in the basement. The landlady had been quite open about them. She'd pointed out that there was even an advantage to having them there, namely that nobody asked questions about anybody. She dropped her eyes as she said that, not out of modesty. She was looking to see if I were pregnant, but I'd only been pregnant a month, so of course there was nothing to see.
The author of The L-Shaped Room, Lynne Reid Banks, set the novel here in Fulham because it's the area she herself escaped to when she had a row with her family.
One time, for one night actually, when I was living at home, I had a terrible quarrel with my mother, and I actually ran away from home. I wasn't a child, I was a grown-up woman in my early 20s. And I packed a bag and I ran away and I went to Fulham and I spent a night, which I can't remember very well. I was in a highly emotional state, in a boarding house in Fulham, and it was much too much for me. I was back home the next day, but walking through those streets looking for a place to live and probably getting it from a newsagent's window must have impressed itself. I remember it was pouring with rain and I was very miserable, and I thought, that's it, I'll go away and live in the most squalid, horrible place I can find. I don't know who I thought I was punishing, but that was my idea of doing the thing of running away from home, doing it right.
The book was remarkable 40 years ago because it followed the story of a woman who was pregnant outside marriage, and it's a very sympathetic account of her experiences.
Yes.
But it was also pioneering in other ways. For example, one of the central characters, again very sympathetically portrayed, is black.
Yeah. And you're probably going to ask me if I knew any black people at that time, and the frank truth is that I didn't. And I am somewhat embarrassed now by my treatment of this black character. I think I made him rather more primitive in his speech and in other ways than I would dream of doing today.
How do you feel about the way that London has evolved as a city over the past 40 years? Are you comfortable with the London of today?
Well, I lived in London until 1939, 1940. Then I lived in Canada for 5 years. I came back to a war-torn, beaten down, but still extant London, in which many of the landmarks that I remembered as a child had gone. Then I watched it being built up, revivified, born again, in many cases hideously. And then I was away for the best part of a decade during the 60s when I was living abroad. And I came back to a very much culturally changed London. I really missed the 60s. But I threw myself into it because I've always loved this city. I've always felt comfortable and happy here. I've always wanted to live here. And it's a place where I would never want to be far away from.